Yeah, you're gonna have to shout if you need anything.
Okay. Is it gone silent completely?
It's not reliable.
Okay.
So it's out right now.
So don't shout at me because it's out, okay?
Yeah, I know.
I can hear you fine.
Yeah. And I'm telling you if well, no. It's unreliable. This is a long, small crest 100. Left 5 plus, kinks 120. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! Long, small crest 100. Left 5 plus, kinks 120. Small crest into a left 6, into small crest 70. Right 5 minus. Left 6 plus 200. Right 6 plus. Left 6. Right 4 plus. No cut. Opens. Repeat. Right 4 plus. No cut. Opens. Into a left 5 plus. Into small crest. Into right 6. Into left 4 plus. Right 6 over small crest long, 70. Right 5 minus, 70. Left 5 opens over crest, 50. Right 6 into left 6 long, 50. Turn right 4 minus 50. Repeat, turn right 4 minus 50. Left 5 over jump, into a right 6 plus over small crest, into right 5 loose.
Next.
Left 5 long, into right 6. Left 5 minus 200. Right 6 plus short over small crest into a left 6 plus over crest, 50. Turn right 5 minus 50. Small crest into right 5 plus, long, into crest mid down, into left 5, into right 6, into caution, left 5 over jump, into right 4, 50. Left 5 minus over big crest 70, chicane right entry. Right 5 minus, opens tightens 5 plus. Left 4 over big crest into right 5 minus, no cut, opens tightens 5 plus. 100, stay left over crest 50 into chicane right entry. Turn right 3 minus 600. This is a bump.
Oh, it isn't. Never mind.
600. Left 5 plus, 70. Flat crest, very long, 100. So this is flat crest, very long crest, 100. Right 6 long, slowing over small crest into chicane right entry. So go, go, go. Go, go, go. There's your chicane coming up. Right 5, left 5, into small crest 70, right 5 plus 70, small crest, right 6 plus 200, small crest 50, left 5 minus, into flat crest 300. Small crest 70, right 6 plus 50, chicane right entry. Into right 5 minus, into turn right 3 minus tidy. Right 3 minus tidy. Into left 4 plus 120. left 6 plus 200, long small crest into a left 4 minus very long. Repeat, long small crest, left 4 minus very long. Into a right 5 plus 50. There's your right 5 plus 50. Stay left over small crest 120. Small crest into a left 4 minus no cut. Repeat, left 4 minus no cut into a right 4 minus. Into left 5 plus into turn right 2 plus no cut. Repeat, right 2 plus no cut. .250. Small crest 70. Left 5 over small crest long 180. Then this is a 180. Caution turn left 2 plus tidy 200. Repeat, left 2 plus tidy 200. Small crest into right 5, into crest, into left 6, very long, 350, just floors. Right 6 plus, 250. Repeat, right 6 plus, 250. Caution, right 5 plus, keep going, keep going.
I gotta preserve
right 5
those
plus
brakes.
into chicane, right entry, 100. Turn left 4, no cut, into flat small crest, 250. Right 5 minus, double caution, 50, left 4 into turn right 2 over crest. Repeat, left 4 into turn right 2 over crest. 50. Chicane left entry, 150. Right 6 plus, into left 5 over small crest, 250. Right 6 plus, 50.
Next.
Right 6 very long, 70.
Next.
Left 6 tightens. This is still the 6 long. Left 6 tightens, right 5 minus, 200. Right 6, 250. Left 6 plus over small crest into right 5. Into crest, 70. There's your right 5 up there, crest 70. Left 5 extra long over small crest, 50. Rough into right 4 plus. Repeat, rough into right 4 plus. Into stay left over small crest, 120. Left 6 plus into a caution, right 4 tightens 3. And repeat, caution, right 4 tightens 3. Into small crest, into left 5, 70. Repeat, left 5, 70. Right 5 plus over small crest, into left 4, very long. Into right 5 over small crest, 70. Left 5 minus over long crest, 50. Small crest, 50. Right 3 long go. Repeat, right 3 long go, 400. Stay left over crest, left over long crest into jump, 70. Stay left over small crest, 50. Left 6 plus into right 6. Left 6 tightens and opens over long small crest into chicane right entry. Chicane right entry. Turn left 3 minus no cuts. Repeat, turn left 3 minus no cuts. Right 4 minus 50. left 6 extra long, into small crest, into left 5 minus long, opens over small crest 50. Right 4 no cut 100.
Say again?
Right 4 no cut 100. Small crest 150. Repeat small crest 150, turn right 3 plus. Left 6 plus, long over small crest 150. Repeat left 6 plus, long over small crest 150, flat small crest 150. Right 6 plus, into right 5 minus 70. Left 6 over jump 100. Repeat 70, left 6 over jump 100, chicane right entry. Then jump 450. Left 5 plus opens very long into very long crest 250.
What's this?
Yeah, that's a left 5 plus opens very long into a very long crest 250. Then a caution big jump down 200. There's your big jump down 200, right 6 plus no cut into slow over small jump. There's your slow over small jump into a left 6 over double small jumps 250. Small crest into a left 6 plus, into right 6 plus over small crest 350. Right 6 over crest 70, right 5 minus over crest down 200. Right 6 over small jump 120, small crest 70. Right 6 over small jump 450. Chicane right entry. Left 4 over crest long 70, jump down 150. Turn right 1 around barrels. Repeat, right 1 around barrels.
Triangle.
Right 1. Right 6, 120, left 6, 50. Right 6, 300s. Left 6 plus 50, left 5 plus, into right 6, 250. Repeat, left 6 plus 50, left 5 plus, into right 6, 250. Right 6 into flat small crest, 200s. Small crest into right 5 plus, rough starts 100.
What was this?
Right 5 plus, rough starts 100. Small crest 50. Right 5 plus, over crest tidy 150. Stay left over small crest, into right 6 plus, into left 4 minus. Right 6 plus, left 4 minus, 120. Turn right 4 minus very long, 450, over double small crest. Repeat. Repeat 450 over double small crest, left 5 100, mid small crest 50. Repeat 100, mid small crest 50, caution left 5 over jump opens 250. Right 6 plus, left 6 plus, 180. Left 5 minus no cut, 300. mid small crest, 120, chicane right entry. This is left 5 minus no cut. This is 300, mid small crest, 120, chicane right entry.
Too soon.
Small jump 150, flat small crest 100, flat long crest 300, right 6 plus over small crest 50, flat small crest 250, left 5 plus, very long go 200, flat small crest 200, which is that one. Stay right over small crest 70.
Next.
Small crest into a left 6 over crest 100. And a caution crest into right 6 plus short into jump down into left 6. Repeat, crest right 6 plus short, jump down into left 6. Right 5 minus 180. Left 5 plus over small crest into right 5 plus over finish 100, left 6. Good job. He couldn't.